to another episode of the Laid Back Life podcast, where we're talking about how to love entrepreneurship and improve daily while having a great life. Today's episode, in the words of Rod Serling, requires a slightly different introduction. Normally, we are talking to people about something they've accomplished. And don't get me wrong, Ron Payne has accomplished a ton. He ensures his clients' estate planning, probate, and small business needs are addressed with clarity and precision. He's got over 13 years of experience running his own firm, using his background as a professional musician and music educator, focusing on helping families navigate life's important decisions, assisting with putting in place last wills and testaments, irrevocable and revocable trusts, power of attorneys, advance directives, business succession planning, and of course, probate as well, to take the legal burdens off his clients' shoulders and allow them to actually focus on the loss of a loved one. That being said, this episode came up in not so much an aspirational way. Ron posed a question that the answer has been phenomenal in that we have no real answer. Like, as you move up in affluence, how do you raise your kids to not be spoiled, to not be entitled, to have like a similar upbringing for you? And so he posted it in our Solutions for Lawyers Facebook group. I think, I don't know, we had 50, 75, 100 comments. It exploded. People have messaged me about it privately. So we're like, let's go on and talk through this. So when I say like, this one is not something we've accomplished because both of us are still raising our children. So we're going to talk through what we've done, what works, what doesn't work, what thoughts we have, and whatnot. Did I capture all that correct?
I think you did. What a great introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, it's easy though. When I started this podcast, I was like, we're not going to talk about business. We're going to talk about life, which will then come over to business. But then like it's been so much easier because I'm just like, hey, what cool things are going on for you? And let's discuss them. In this case, child raising is probably the most important thing we can do as parents.
And it really does intertwine with running your own business, right? Because running your own business is like having a child, sometimes a quite difficult one. But you've also got to raise your kids and balance the family. If you have the success you hope for, then obviously when you start out, it's nickels and dimes all the way. And then hopefully they turn into quarters and dollars. And then all of a sudden you're like, man, it's a pretty good life. Wait a second, where are we? It's a pretty
Dig
cool
it.
journey, man.
I like that analogy. All right, let me do a quick shout out for our last episode. We had Kristen David on from Up Leveling Your Business. Kristen talked about how to live the laid back life from the road. Kristen does about a third of her time in Seattle, a third of her time in France, and about a third of her time traveling for the different up leveling conferences, including some of the ones she talked about on the show. So that was a very cool talking about like the systems, the processes, the people to allow you to do all this stuff. But let's dive in to parenting. Parenting children when your privilege changes. I think that was such a great turn of phrase that you had.
I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm blessed. I've made some career moves lately myself, and my wife is a teacher. I graduated high school, wanted to be a band director, became a band director. After doing that for a couple of years, then I said I don't want to do that anymore, and became a lawyer. And so we were both teachers. We started out, pay in North Carolina is not that great for teachers, still not that great. Hopefully they'll do something about it one day. But as we've grown, and she's got her master's degree, and then she's got a second job, and then I, you know, started building the company, and then have now moved over to another one, and we've gone a long ways from functionally what was two teacher salaries to now, her two jobs, and then my quite busy full-time gig, and it's been a real change in trajectory from what I was used to and my perspective on things.
So I love how you answer this question, but honestly, step back for me. Like, let's talk about your childhood a little bit.
So I had a pretty wild childhood. Just the 10-second version is when I was two, my parents divorced. My dad was a corporate attorney. My mom was a pharmaceutical rep. So on its face, you look at that and go, well, man, your upbringing must have been pretty good. Corporate lawyer, pharmaceutical rep in the 80s. However, they got divorced and it went to hell in a handbasket. That's the nicest way I can put it. At one point, I had a legal team. My dad had a legal team. My mom had a legal team. I think there was a legal team between the legal teams, and it was a hot mess. And so when I turned, I guess it was 10, my mom passed away a couple of years after that. I guess when I was 8, she passed. When I was 10, I moved to North Carolina. I needed a change of scenery. And so my dad's twin brother runs a dairy farm. And so I grew up on the dairy farm. Now, I won't sit here and pretend for a minute that I didn't struggle. I had a blessed childhood, everything I ever needed. But I grew up,
Especially milk.
yeah, we had two 45,000 gallon tanks. We were never short milk. Butter and ice cream, we were set.
There
Homemade
we
ice
go.
cream is the best. And so we had everything we ever needed, but we weren't growing up with like we weren't taking extravagant vacations. I got to travel, but most of our travel was centered around going to the beach or traveling to see family. Um, I got to go to some pretty cool summer camps in high school, up at the university to study music, but I paid for those myself. And so with my full-time job that I worked full-time 40 hours a week at Walmart when I got to high school off of the family farm. I took a day job, if you will, and did that while I was in school, worked all my way through college. So, I was used to kind of working for my things, but my upbringing was very much rural, small town North Carolina. We had what we needed. We didn't spend a lot of money. We didn't go a lot of places. If it wasn't with the church, we just didn't go. So,
So very, very interesting and like the similarities. My parents are still together and happy with each other for the most part. But my dad was a mail carrier. My mom was a substitute teacher for a while, ended up basically glorified babysitting with a family for about 10 years at the time, so didn't really have a consistent full-time job. Similar, and then like for me, I worked at a flower store full time when in high school. So while you were at Walmart, I was
that's so
unloading
cool.
trucks and chopping flowers to like, well, the funniest part was, my dad delivered mail, like I said. So for like the week of Mother's Day, I made more money than my dad that week. Now, mind you, I worked like 120 hours
I
or
bet.
something in those time frames while he worked, 40. But it was a funny thing to like compare paychecks with my father at 17 and be like, hey man, for this one week I beat you with my whatever 80 hours of double pay overtime. Um, but anyway, so like we are neither of us is in a position to give our child the same childhood that we had in a most people would say good way. I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
the fair assumption. Like I agree with the not having to worry about things, but like the ability to take whatever vacation we want is different than what we had as kids.
Oh, absolutely. So I got to take my kids summer of 23, and we would have gone earlier, but the pandemic threw a huge wrench in things. And so summer of 23, we took both kids to Italy for 3 weeks. Now, I mean, we weren't staying at the Ritz, but I went to Italy for 3 weeks. We stayed in Rome for a week. Well, Rome for a week, in Naples for a few days. We went up to Montespertoli and lived in the mountain country. We stayed at a real working farm, agriturismo in the mountains. A couple days in Pisa, jet set over to see just Spain, just outside of Barcelona, saw all of the sites, and then flew home. And that's not a vacation that I could have even conceived
Yeah.
my 4 years of teaching. It was like a once in my life, maybe I'll get to go to Italy someday. And now we're planning our next international trip. So, and only a year after we planned our last one, we just took last year off. So it's definitely been a change, a
Well,
blessed change.
so for us, like we had like our big trip. I grew up in South Florida, so our big trips were driving 3 or 4 hours up to Orlando. I now live in Orlando, so like last what was it, Saturday or Sunday, we went to Universal Studios, and my kid's like, "It's raining. Can we go home?" And I was like, "You don't understand. When I was your age, like this was the vacation. For you, it's like a random Sunday." Um, but yeah, I
I
mean,
love
like
it.
it's great, but it's like Aristotle's golden mean, right? Like if you take something to the other extreme, it's just as bad. So like I don't want my kid sitting there thinking like that's a normal vacation, sitting there that like, we did the year-long cross-country road trip. Like I want him to realize like that's not a thing that all of his friends in school have done. I think you want your kids to know that 3 weeks in Italy is not something that everybody they know has done.
Well, that's it, right? So, both of my kids have been on at least two cruises now. The older one's been on a couple more than that, and we've been to Italy, and that's cool. And we are all about experiences over things,
Yeah.
but it's not normal. And I don't want them to go to school and just act like it's all hunky dory and that's what everybody does. And then, somebody's quite upset with them and maybe understandably because they didn't realize that they've never got to leave the town we live in, for whatever reason. And I want them to realize that the privilege that comes with and that the privilege that we have to be able to do that is something that we need to be responsible about in our words and our actions and our using our place of privilege to learn from and hopefully make a difference in the world when they get older. At least that's what I hope we take away from it when they're older and out of the house and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, okay, so spoiler alert, I'm about to talk about Santa Claus. So spoiler alert, I'm about to talk about Santa Claus. Like warning if your kids
Yeah.
are watching, we're about to cover Santa Claus. Like so I was raised I'm Jewish. I was raised Jewish. I didn't understand like Santa I knew, but it was not a thing that impacted me. And so like it's wild to me that now there's a push for parents to like explain to have Santa Claus be responsible for fewer presents because of the children that don't have access to some of the same things. And so like my wife is very specific for, we celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas. For Hanukkah, it's, dad gets you 8 things. My parents get him way more. But for Christmas, it's like, oh, well, Santa Claus got you like this shirt and these shoes and whatever else, and then like your parents got you the Nintendo Switch games and whatnot. And that was just something that was like never considered that being a thing, but it makes sense because like you don't want a kid going to school to say like, oh, well, Santa Claus got me a PS5, and another kid being like, well, why'd Santa Claus only get me socks?
Yeah. And that's it. We've done the same thing kind of too, with our kids that the big presents, and we try to do like I mean, I'm sure most parents do like a capstone present, whatever the big one is, the one you get to open last. And those are never going to be Santa gifts, right? That's, you know, we try to do a little bit more than socks, but I mean, it's not much. And we very much low cap the budget on that for that reason. And we talk to our kids about, we haven't talked to them about Santa yet. In our house, we have a rule. You believe. If you don't believe, don't expect anything. Got it? Got it. Because I don't want them to ruin the joy and the magic for some little kid, like,
Right.
happens to everybody at some point. That's fine, but it ain't gonna be my kid that spoils it. Well, it better not be.
There we go. Let it go as long as
So,
possible. All right, I want to dive into that in more detail, but I want to talk about our this week's newsletter. So you all are watching this on Tuesday. As many of you know, Fridays I have my newsletter that comes out totally free. This Friday is things to add to your day. So last week we talked about making your ideal day, and to the extent that God bless you, you do have any free time, here's some things to add. So different wellness practices, time for hobbies, some things like that that normally don't get into our ideal day, but end up having a great long-term impact on us. So that'll be Friday. That being said, like walk me through more of like what have you done with your kids to try and get this grounded behavior from them?
so this has been a journey we really started on kind of recently. We were just kind of doing our annual end of year things, and I'm all about end of year evaluations and setting new goals for the new year. And we're talking through that stuff with my wife, and I just said, I think our oldest is now 15. So I've got a 15-year-old, I've got a 7-year-old, and we said we really need to start thinking about our 15-year-old, how do we teach him to manage his money? Because he's going to get to be 18 and all of these things that he just can do take for granted. He's about to find the 18-year-old version of us where all of a sudden all of those things don't necessarily exist in the same way. How do we have that conversation? How do we talk to our kids about money? And that led us into this. Well, how do we talk, about privilege and how do we talk about, because look, even though, yeah, I'm not going to fund my kid's social hour through college, that's not our goal. He can work and do those things if he wants, and I support that. But I'm not going to fund those things. I want him to learn that himself. But I also don't want him to work the 40 hours a week I worked in high school. Now, I didn't necessarily have to work that much. I just kind of OCD dived in, but I want him focused on the long-term goal, not the short-term goal. Okay, well, that's a conversation. And then, like my family, so I worked on a farm and we were paid at a very early age. So starting in middle school, I had more money than I knew what to do with, but it was a very simple rule. I made $2 an hour. Now, when you're on a family,
Hey,
but when you're family, they don't have to pay you anything. So,
right.
but the rule was you have to pay for your own lunch, and
Oh,
you have to
okay.
set 10% aside for Jesus. You've got to set 25% aside, or no, 40% aside for savings. So that's 50%. And the other 50%, you can do whatever you want to. You can certainly put it in savings. You can spend it. And I had all the pizza and cookies one could have in middle and high school because of that. But that was the extent of our budget conversation. It's like, well, we need to talk to our kids about money. And we extra need to talk to our kids about money because, the numbers are getting bigger and not just for me, but for the kids.
But
So
Ron,
that led us to
you're
that.
yeah, but like you're underselling that. You're like, oh, that was the budget conversation we had. But that's most people have no conversation. Like here,
Well,
you're sitting down with, you've got 16 bucks a day, you got 50% of an earmark, you've got eight to do whatever you want. That's 40 bucks a week. I mean, that's so different than most people.
and I found too, it's so weird to me how genetics work. My older one inherited my wife's procrastination, proclivity for not spending money. We can
Okay.
give him money for Christmas. He won't spend it. You put money on his Apple card, he won't spend it. My little guy, he will spend that money on whatever coin of whatever game he's playing on his iPad, mine coins or whatever, so fast. And I remember that as a kid. I worked at Walmart for a few years, and I kid you not, I probably bought half the store. I think I spent 25% of my paycheck at Walmart, and I kind of realized that, so I started having them pull it out of my check and stick it in whatever plan they had for employees at the time. But yeah, I was like, we need to have like, so I didn't know how to budget my money. I didn't know what things cost in the real world.
Uh,
So I got my first real teacher paycheck. It was January of 2005. I started my first teaching job, and I thought, man, I'm going to get a $2,800 paycheck, and then they're going to take 10% out of it for taxes, and then I'm going to have $2,500 left. Oh man. So when I got an $1,800 or $1,500 check, because I had signed up for every optional insurance known to man, it's only $10, it's only $5. And all of a sudden I'm like, Dad, I don't know how I'm going to make rent this month. My wife hasn't started her new job yet. We had just gotten married. We were living in a new town. Help. And he, of course he helped us, but I didn't even know that when you get older, that what they take more taxes out of your check. Makes
right,
sense, but I was assuming really low numbers that I would get all back at the end of the year. I didn't know about that. I didn't realize that between rent and food and all these things, before all of my real expenses were kind of like taken care of, all I really had to worry about was kind of the fun things, gas, insurance, like my housing and my utilities were generally covered by whatever thing I was staying in college. I really wanted to make sure that my kid knew, okay, so fine, because he's thinking about going into being a teacher. I think that's great, but I don't want him to assume anything about how much money he will or won't have. So
right.
just having more detailed conversations, but then also, um, I want him to understand why we get to do the things we get to do as a family and why for him individually, when he's 24, that's not necessarily going to happen. Now, that doesn't mean he ain't going to come vacation with mom and dad because we want that. But also, why don't you have that? How did we get there? What allows us to do that? So that's where we started. The other cool thing I wanted to make sure I shared, we did this last night. We've been talking about TikTok, right? And the TikTok ban and the unban and whatever. And I may or may not have downloaded Sheng Shu, the Little Red Book app, and we were looking at some things and talking about traveling to China and how we theoretically, if we wanted to go to China next week, we could, right? We've got passports, we've got resources, we could go to China and take a 2 week vacation because we're seeing all these cool sites on these videos. And so, in talking about privilege, there's this video on YouTube, and I'll have to send you the link, and you can post it with the cast if you want to. But where they talk about, everybody starts on the starting line, and then they're like, all right, if your parents are both employed, take 2 steps forward. If you've never had to worry where your food comes from, take 2 steps forward. And then at the end of
Right.
it, they have the kids turn around and look where everybody is. And then they run the race, and the winner gets $100, right? Well, of course, nobody in the back got that. And I just thought that was such a great way to have a conversation about you don't realize the station that my parents put me in, even though I grew up on a farm, both of them college educated. I never worried about food in any household, and their parents didn't worry about that. And my kids certainly aren't worried about that. I just thought it led to a great conversation.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you mentioned the like take two steps forward. I don't remember where I saw this. I don't know if this was a TV show or somebody told me, but they did that in the show or at their office. And then the person who was all in the front was like, "Oh, I won!" Like as if it was like a thing that they won the most entitlement of everybody at the office. And everyone's like, "That's like you're exactly explaining what feels like, sounds like." I
Yeah.
was thinking, you
And I
won
want to make sure my
racism.
kid doesn't get to the front of that and go, look, I beat you,
Right.
not realizing that, I mean, yeah, you did win, but what did you win? Yeah, everybody else is behind you. And I I think it's really important, at least for us, and I'm sure for your family too. Like, yes, we have the privilege, and I'm absolutely going to take my kids on all the coolest trips so that I can possibly live the best life I can within my means. I also want him to be mindful of others don't have that, so we need to be mindful of giving back, however you're able to do so, whether that's giving of your time, giving of your resources. We're blessed with a great scout unit. There are families who can't afford the scouting, and scouting is not in the realm of kids' activities.
Yeah.
Scouting is cheap, but it's important to me that other kids get to do scouting, even if they don't necessarily have that same resource. Because
Right.
there was a time in my life when it would have been expensive for us to do. So,
Well, now all kids' activities are so
man,
expensive.
high school is such an expensive time in life. I
Well, and
knew,
oh,
but
sorry.
whoa. Oh, go ahead.
No, the other thing for me is so I mean, my kid, he'll be 7 in March, and just like finding opportunities for him to volunteer is so hard because it's like, oh, the food bank, with their insurance plan, there's only like one night a month. The rest of the time you have to be over 12 or 14 because they're afraid that you're gonna touch something or whatever else. And
Yeah.
like it's very interesting like to try to see, real Orlando or real most other towns. Like it's harder for some of these kids to get access to the opportunity to give back when you can. Obviously, there's plenty of programs where the children are the recipient. I mean, I'm on the board for Big Brothers Big Sisters, but like I could get my kid a big faster than I could get him to see what the littles are going through. And like that's the goal that, I'm trying to get here.
Absolutely. And we're finding that to be true here too. Just, opportunities, especially the 15-year-old's getting to the point where there are more opportunities for him to see things. But yeah, for the little guy, I mean, there's so many times where like, well, we only take unregistered, like you can volunteer, that'd be great. You just have to go through this 37-step licensure process because our insurance requirements or whatever. And I get that. And they got to make sure people are safe in this day and age. But also, I really want them to see the real side, the reality of humanity. Um, and it really is tricky to do to educate them on paper because I think that conversation is important, but it's not any good if you don't go outside, where the rubber meets the road and see the reality on the ground. So,
Yeah, totally. All right. So let's keep going down this path, but I want to talk about for you all listening to this, it's March. We have two digital products we're giving you a deal on in March. We have our Making a Marketing Plan. It's 20 pages on how to make a marketing plan. We have our Ultimate Law Firm Sales Process. It's about 20 pages on a great law firm sales process with included emails and stuff. Normally they're 500 a piece. This month they're 500 for both. So if you're interested, the link will be in the comments or reach out to us and we will get you access to that. So, Ron, we're talking through trying to expose our kids to the normal life, the real life, keep them grounded, go through this. If you could go back in time, you've got a 15 and a 7-year-old, would you do anything differently earlier? And if so, what?
I don't know. So I'm blessed to be I'd say I'm technically the stepdad to my oldest one. And I can't say that I do a ton of things differently in that because I grew up on a farm, I had such, I say parents, but it was my aunt and uncle kind of raised me.
Yeah.
Just because after the divorce, I moved to North Carolina just to kind of reset myself. It was intended to be a temporary move, and I like really started thriving in school and stuff. And they said, look, you deserve to have some peace. So stay there. And I would just fly back home to visit my dad. And growing up on a farm really kept me grounded. Um, I think the one thing that I have learned that I didn't, it's not different for my kids because I didn't get my oldest until he was already 5. But right after he came into my life, there was a death in the family, and I had been out of touch with my farm family for a number of years. for no particular reason, just you're busy and all these things. And I wish I hadn't had that gap in time. But it was
Okay.
so cool for him to then get to see the farm side of things and to have those conversations and to drive around in the field and talk about cows getting milked and all these like this is where your food comes from. It's not just because mommy and daddy can swipe a credit card. And that's not really about privilege so much as it, but also it is a privilege to get to go see where it's made. And I wish that they had, and well, and also we're in the city, they're out in the country. I want them to see that there's another side of the coin because I think one of the conversations that it's this is the underarching theme about wealth inequality or equality, as the case is. It's really empathy. It's okay to be where you are. I don't have any shame in what we've accomplished. I've worked really hard for it. My wife has worked really hard for it. You've worked really hard for it. But I don't want my kid to be the jerk who's not empathetic about it.
Yes.
And I want to acknowledge that my ancestors had a lot to do with me being where I am. And I want
Yeah.
to be considerate and caring. And I think getting to be around people who are not like you. So there's nobody as country as what my family is on the farm. And so getting to go to the farm and visit my extended family, many of whom have lived in Taylorsville or surrounding areas their whole life. And they love it there, and that's where they're going to be. I go on vacation, but that's home. I, they get to see that, and I missed a few years of that, and I'm really glad that they get to see that. And had I had him younger, he wouldn't have gotten to see that at an earlier age,
Right.
perhaps. And just having my extended life in the family has been huge for us. And seeing people from different walks, we see it in scouting, we see it on the farm, and it's a thing that even though I didn't miss it, I want to keep making sure we do that. We continue to not as our privilege and our station changes. Sometimes your friend groups change, and that's okay. It's a natural part of growing. But I also want to make sure that our empathy and our interaction with others outside of our circle remains a constant area of growth for us.
Well, but I also love that you talked about like the generation behind you. I think about like I got over $100,000 in scholarship money to law school, still had to take out loans. Thank God, like my parents had me in the position where I could afford to do that for 3 years instead of having to go right into the job force to have a law for, to be where I'm at now. Like there's a huge investment in monetary, in time, and all this stuff. And so, like, I think that's the biggest thing that I try to focus with my kid is like the delayed gratification. There's the famous marshmallow test. Can you wait 15 minutes to get a second marshmallow? And then, like, those kids became so much more successful and well adjusted later. But I think, like, our previous generation, our parents, aunt and uncle, whatever, like,
Hmm.
helped us put in the time to help us put in the time to have the slack to become a lawyer, go to law school, open up our own firm. Like, and so like I want to force my kid to still realize things come slowly and with effort.
And the best things in life take effort and come slowly. And oftentimes the things that come quick and easy are not the best things and may in fact not even be best for you. Um, you know, in that hindsight, like you said, like my parents took me to piano lessons. I played piano for at both households, my dad's house and my extended family's house, for years, which set me up for success going into music in middle school, which set me up successfully to go to summer camp on scholarship because I had done well at prior auditions, which set me up to go to college I didn't have a full scholarship, but I had like 15 scholarships. I didn't pay for college undergraduate my first 3 years because of all these little scholarships I got, which I would have had if they hadn't taken me to all those piano lessons, let me
Sure.
not be on the farm for 4 weeks every summer so I could go to summer camp, which is the busiest time for farm work. And they were, don't worry about it. We got it
Yeah.
covered. So they really did make a lot of sacrifices. It's such a good point.
Well, and also I think there's the societal changes in that time, right? Like I remember wanting to rent a movie and having to drive to Blockbuster and hope they had it, or ordering CDs and having it 6 to 8 weeks to ship. Now it's like an immediate download or Amazon can deliver stuff to my house in 2 hours. So like I think we need to try and force things in their life to be slower and harder, regardless of the financial position, but then also with the financial position on top of that.
Yeah, and one of the things I started this year with the kids that I hope pays dividends on this conversation. I've always been a New Year's goal New Year's resolutions, goal setting kind of guy. That's just the world I live in. But I want to make sure that my kids learn because in this age of instant gratification, right? You click on it, it's there, whether it's
Right.
stuff, it's digital video, you know, your game always saves. None of this, like you get called to dinner and you have to start back at level one of Mario World. And so I made them, we did visual or vision boards this year. I did my written resolutions like I've done, but we all did family vision boards. Where do you want to be in a year? And we're actually keeping them up in the kids' rooms. So now my 7-year-old's vision board is, I mean, he's 7. But my 15-year-old, I'm so proud of him. He wants to make all state. He wants to be in the performances at school. And those are not instant goals. And so, the other day I asked him, I said, hey, have you done everything you need to do? And he was like, "Oh yeah." And then he left, and I heard him start practicing. Well, I was actually asking him if he'd done the litter box. Have you done your chores? Is what I was thinking. And he thought, "Oh, Dad's asking me if I've practiced my instrument. I want to do that." Well, he ended up getting first chair at the local audition, so now he gets to go to the state auditions in a few
Oh,
weeks. So it's the inkling of it that I want him to know that there's like this: do hard work, do more hard work, do more hard work, and then the reward might come. Maybe you get first chair, maybe you don't get it,
right.
but you didn't leave anything on the table. I don't know. I hope we get there. But the vision board thing's been kind of neat because I hope I want them to look past their hand, right, past the iPad
Sure.
or the iPhone that's right in front of his face.
Well, but like that's what I love about habits. So you
Mm-hmm.
can sit here and have the vision board, like, okay, I want to make all state. And so that breaks down to, this practice schedule, to this daily thing, to this. And so then you can go and do that when you have the question asked. Like that become like doing the habit daily almost becomes the instant gratification that gets you the long-term success that isn't going to come instant gratification.
Hey, I'm really glad you said that because I wanted to give your newsletter a shout out, an unsolicited
Oh,
shout out.
well, thank you.
You've been doing I think the 26 days of habits and or each day. I don't know if it's one a day or what, but I know I love that part of your newsletter. I've really enjoyed that. I reread first book for 2025. I about said 2026. My first book of the year was rereading Atomic Habits. And I actually loved it so much. And I thought, you know what? My kid's a teenager. High school's a way different game than middle school. His middle
Yeah.
school didn't allow homework as a matter of like a rule. Like the principal said, no homework. High school does not feel that way. And so it's a huge adjustment for him. And Andy's got high school marching band and all these after school things. So I bought him the book. And so he's been working through reading that. But man, those atomic habits are just so important to building those long-term, input goals versus output goals. And it's important in running your law firm and doing your intake, but it's also important in getting to college or becoming a better musician or being a better parent.
Yeah, I mean, ultimate of the 400 something books I've read over the last 2.5 years, that's the one I recommend the most. Because like everything in life is I am happy with this. I want to make this change over here. And so then like what change do you need to make to get the outcome? If it's weight, if it's health, if it's time with kids. I mean, that's some of the coaching. A lot of what I do is allowing parents to have the time to spend with their children because they're not working 80, 100 hours a week every week in and out. So yeah,
That's
Atomic
it. And
Habits.
realizing you've got to like one of my goals this year is spend more time with my kids. And it's not that I don't spend time with them, right? But I want to spend more time with them because I thought for all you folks out there who've got middle school kids and you're like, oh, I've got 5, 6 more years. No, you don't. When they hit high school, good luck. I thought my kid would be busy as a junior and senior. He has been so busy as a freshman. And we're like, my wife and I are both like, man, I thought we were going to have more time with him. And he's so busy. So
So it's not a he doesn't want to spend time with you. It's a there are so many demands on him that
yeah, he's
he
not
doesn't have the
home.
time.
Yeah, so in marching band in the fall, and our school is not a competitive high school in the traditional sense. Like they don't do all the things. They
Right.
went to 4 competitions, which is not egregious. It's a good number, but yeah, I mean, they only went to 4. But then the other two of the other weekends, they had practices to prepare for said competitions.
Gotcha.
He ended up, and then they had band camp before school started. So he had 2 free weekends in its entirety between August 1st and December 18th, 2 free weekends because we get after football season. Well, the team made the playoffs. Oh, well, now it's the Christmas parade. Well, there's multiple, right? We live in an urban area. There's like half a dozen Christmas parades, and they marched in, I think, four different parades. And so, like, every weekend, there's just something. And then those 2 weekends, he's like, brother, I'm done. Can I just like hide in my room and just sit in silence? Um,
Like, excuse me, I made decisions to make sure I wasn't the beginning of Cats in the Cradle. I did not expect to be the end of Cats in the Cradle while my kid's in high school.
and that really is it. So that was part of our impetus for that. But also, so all of the parents out there, you think you've got high school. We still get to see him every night for dinner. So family dinner has been a huge thing for us. It always has been, but it extra is now. But also, I don't know. I've told all my parents, my friends of parents of middle school kids, you don't have 6 more years. You have
God,
2 or 3.
good.
Um, Embrace it and love it, man.
Good to know, man. All right, so next week we'll have Russell Knight on. Russell is a family law attorney in Chicago, Illinois, who's also involved in some really other cool, awesome projects. So I am super excited for the conversation we're going to have there. But I don't want to leave without a little bit more from you, Ron, here. If anybody's been listening for the last, 40, 50 minutes and wants to pick your brain, wants to hear more, or maybe they've got some estate planning stuff they need to send your way, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So, absolutely, the best way to reach me is via email. I don't answer the phone for anybody not named my wife, but you can reach out to me at rpayne@tuggleduggins.com. I'm pretty almost impossible to miss on social media, though I'm trying to cut back these days. So, email is definitely the best way to reach me. And I do estate planning and probate throughout North Carolina statewide. And I love all things technology. So, hit me up.
There we there we go. All right, and so to our listeners, parents, people wanting to start from scratch, well, not from scratch. The kid's alive, it's not from scratch, but like want to walk down the path that you and I are talking about now. Like, where would you suggest they start? Let's end with that. Like, what's the action step today that they can implement to start down this path of really focusing on how to parent children when your privilege changes?
I think the two things that I would recommend the most, it's going to sound cliche after our conversations maybe, but read Atomic Habits because it just breaks down for you getting where you want to be on the now steps versus the outcome goals.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing is don't be afraid to have the conversation with your kids at a young age. Jay Ruane said it on the Facebook post how he was involving his kids at conversations at super early ages. And
Yeah.
I thought you just make it a natural part of your conversation. You say, well, I haven't done it. I don't know where to start. Just talk about it. You don't have to give them every single detail of every single transaction in your life. You don't have to show them the bank account. Just tell them what things cost. We had a cool conversation about the cost of rent. And I just asked my kid, how much do you think rent is? How much do you think a gallon of gas is? How much do you think it costs to fill up the Prius? Just silly questions. And it's interesting to hear what your kids think. And those questions, or ask them what they think about money, and that will spark those conversations in you. And maybe you'll find out your kid's already a guru and you'll learn something. Um, Maybe you'll know where to start at that point, but have the conversation. Don't be afraid of it just because you don't know where to start. Start with a question.
Yeah, well, and the thing that I don't know, scares the living daylights out of me, there's a study from Cambridge University that found kids as young as 7 have mostly formalized their beliefs about money. Now, obviously,
Wow.
they can overcome that and change it, but like you're telling me a 7-year-old, like for a 7-year-old to have a different view on money than they already have, they are overcoming their previously held beliefs. Like that's nuts because my child is going to be 7 in March and there are some things where he's very good about, and there are some things where he still doesn't understand about money. And so we're working through as much as we can, as quickly as we can, before these things get, congealed in his brain.
Yeah, and but the other thing I think that might could be helpful for folks is let your kids, if you've got devices and stuff, let them have a couple bucks on. You give them $5 to spend on their device, and don't tell them don't get it for them. Just say here's $5 on your Apple Pay, whatever. You'll learn really quickly. Some kids are savers, some kids are spenders, some kids just can't spend it fast enough, and they don't realize how quickly it goes, and then they want more, and then okay, you can have some more in a month. I don't know. We've learned a lot, so it's
Yeah.
good stuff, man.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ron, for being with us. Thank you to everybody who watched and listened. We'll see you back here next week for the conversation with Russell Knight. Until then, let's all take as much effort as we can into raising kids who will be that much better than us going forward.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man.